Yusuf, do you think that you really want to change what you said 5 years ago?
Not really. I don't want to change it, but I'd like to just focus on one thing, that the aspirations of the people are perceived from within the people out. Uh, the idea of elite of people to be responsible for planning and imposing lifestyles and offering advancements in standard of living to a mass of a country is outdated. I feel that the people took the initiative in most of the third world countries during the 50s and the 60s, and I feel that the grassroots, although unorganized and unsophisticated in displaying their point of view, have leveraged out a very good outcome, which made countries like Algeria or Egypt or Syria or Lebanon. Lebanon, of course, coming out of the war now, we'll see what will happen there. But the general population in those countries became ready for the next phase. The next phase, which will really put the human element to responsibility, because what happened when a small group of people, that is why I was focusing on this slide. I forgot about all these slides, Nathan, really. I appreciate that you remind me of all these things. These group of bureaucrats in the desert are living very comfortably, and they are enjoying a very cosmopolitan and international lifestyle. They really don't have any bad intentions, but the state of planning cannot be in the hands of few for a very big number of people. On the village scale, it got to be a certain level of conscious, so the people, the general population of this village, should be aware that they need school, they need a hospital, they need a road to be paved. It got to be a certain level of awareness, and that was not existing. When a project like a government office of any sort, or when a hospital or when a school had to be built, as if it is sent from God. It is not perceived by the local people how in the world schools plan and for what purpose and what curriculum is taught there. And the idea of bringing up the general population to the level of responsibility and the level of awareness was very well perceived by the grassroots movements in this past few decades, after World War II in particular. What I really want to focus on is that the next phase is going to be much better. There is a program which is, again, it starts from the most powerful economy of the world, the Western economy and the World Bank, etc., etc. These organizations have to play the major role in seeding and feeding the growth momentum of the world and keep the stability in its deprived pockets. The next phase is beginning to focus on decentralization and giving authority to local villages and local councils of people to communicate and critique their own needs. And they could not do that easily without putting those local people, because all those villages, although they seem poor on the appearance, there are so many wealthy merchants and people making money without paying taxes, literally, because these are tribal societies. The system of monitoring and reporting and collecting taxes is not that sophisticated, so the economy will leverage development money for hospitals and school and roads. So what a very interesting program I advise those of you who are in architecture and urban planning and who are planning to pursue that career for whatever it means. If you are not planning that, we pay $10 to $15 an hour. Just give me a call next week. We will give you a lot of drawings to do without having to worry about low-income economy around the world. But if any of you are very serious and persistent about pursuing the low-income development around the world, you must focus and you must seek and you must get on the phone and call and get information on the new program which have been implemented in Egypt, which I call it phase 2 of the awakening of the world population. And that is called the decentralization program. This is a very successful step. It incorporates computers on the village level. They are the automation of information. They teaching the people on the local level how to communicate via computers, how to log information, and how to go around and find out who is not paying taxes, literally. So the fear of the hierarchical tribal powers and the fear of the exposure if the wealthy man in town knows that you reported him to IRS, the equivalent of the IRS here, is not existing anymore. The stimulus is beginning to happen, and if that movement begin to evolve, that means government subsidiary and support to major infrastructure will begin to be less and less. And then you'll begin to see that the communities in any scale are purchasing the projects and the mandates which they can afford. Instead of having all this confusion of major cities, a city like Cairo, I even forgot how many millions live there because the population changed by every year. Millions are added to the population of this city. It's just like Mexico City, like the major megapolis of the world. And the hope is in phase 2, in that decentralization program. And the communication via computers and processing of information with high efficiency is beginning to show good signs. I was not very optimistic person in that respect because I had my idealistic confrontation with the system, and I had my proposal submitted to many countries from Latin America to the Middle East, so on. When I say proposals, they are not a piece of 8.5 by 11 with some fancy design on it. I'm talking about total efforts which introduce building systems with international contractors, with support from major lenders, World Bank support, and we came to the point, you see the question mark, why it is not happening. Everything is offered to solve a housing problem in a country, yet it is not happening. Why? Technology is there, the financing and the pro forma, the economic pro forma, which we do put together here on every small project, whether you are making a small little grocery store or a high-rise, you have to submit to the banker a pro forma to be able to get the construction loan and so on. All these efforts have been done, and for some reason the output was just, there was no even rejection. And that is one of the most famous things which Hassan Fathi used to say, that third world economy have been a victim of people who don't even listen because they are not interested in providing the solution. Until we provide phase 2 with the means it takes, and that is the people themselves beginning to say we are leveraging taxes this year to build that road and this hospital, nobody is going to develop the third world. And that level of awareness is just beginning to evolve after a very exhausting path of motivation, wars, economic crisis resulting to high levels of starvation and malnutrition, overpopulation, no schools to take the kids, all the complexities which happen in a third world economy. So the pressures on the people are forcing the system to adopt phase 2. So let us see what's happening and let us begin to be curious about it, and let us see that the hope, similar to that hope I had 20 years ago when I was a graduate, still exists, and that you will pursue it. And I apologize for the size of this publication which I asked my office to put together and bring it to you. But the size of this publication is very expressive of the wide scope and the immense amount of information and topics which urban planning and architecture students have to go to. If you really want to be serious about your profession, if you want to have inputs to this life, I suggest that you see why I put so many different things in that big pile of paper. And one of the most important chapters is the Blendo Manifesto. It is in the middle, and it has nothing to do with the third world at all. But it has to do with the desire to have expression, the desire for design, and the desire for quality. So if any of you did not have a copy of that, there is a couple of more copies. I have only one for each one, and Professor Shapira informed me that you have 15 members of this class, so I made the same number. So the issue here is not really going through a class and getting a degree. It is a commitment, and you are going to find out that what you are going to learn in the class is only the methods and the means. Again, going back to the Blendo Manifesto, you will find an accumulation of opinions of major key people which we all respect, like Charles Moore and Frank Gehry, etc., and they are all talking about the style and the people, and what are we doing with style today in Los Angeles, period. So don't separate the feelings of the people in Los Angeles from the people in Greece or in Egypt, because that is the very reason you see Eiffel Tower on the Pyramid Avenue as a symbol of entertainment. People are people everywhere, and the desire for quality via design exists. When they fail to find the style of their own, they go and they seek styles which were produced before and were successful in communicating the meaning of richness and entertainment. Elegance is communicated to us via symbolism, and I don't know, the style of our ties change. So let us pursue it from this point of view, and let us be serious. And if you are not, give me a call, because we hire people for $10 to $15 an hour. We like to have good, talented people who are not interested in profound persuasion of human betterment. A lot of draftsmen around, a lot of people in the design profession with very good capabilities to design details. But before you do that, please, if you are seeking the art and the science of design for human happiness, get into the depths of the human aspirations. And that is where all the other cultures have been doomed, when the masses have been left out.
Thank you. I wanted to make a comment about the Blender Manifesto. It's an interesting coincidence that today the news in the paper was that we have just completed the report on LA 2000. And I think this whole problem of growth is a universal problem. It regards absolutely every area, whether it's low income, high income. The question of how to grow, where to grow, why to grow, is debated universally, and I think that Los Angeles is undergoing now the growth pains, or the non-growth pains. And the fact that our planet went from 1 billion people at the end of the 18th century to 4 billion people today continues to create all sorts of upheavals, and therefore I think that the whole effort to go to other planets and space flight and so forth perhaps makes sense in this light, that perhaps we could find new resources, perhaps we could find more space and so forth.
Professor Shapira, that's why we are addressing here the pride and the dignity of the professional. We are not talking about anything more than we have to handle ourselves and our profession much more seriously. then society have manipulated most professions for their own benefit, whether that was architecture or law or medicine or whatever. But our responsibility as architects is to maintain our balance and our patience and stay alive humanly while economic corruption, which we exercised in Los Angeles as the state of speeded up development and explosion of style. The explosion of style in Los Angeles, the volume of construction beyond the imagination. How many of us as architects have lost their sanity in the middle of this explosion? That's the issue. The issue is how can we maintain our values? How can we maintain our perceptions of what form and what style is the wisest for the community and the society and the scale we are designing for. So we will provide neighborhoods which seem to be harmonious and seem to be in context with the human scale which is living in it. One of the sheets I presented here is a curve which shows the quality of life vis-a-vis the volume of the city and the community. And there is so much to be learned into human scale, regardless of the reasons. It's not only architecture which is interested in human scale. I know that in this class some of you are not architectural students and some are only interested in pursuing design of apparatus and devices and solve a lot of life problems, not necessarily buildings, gasoline pumps and earthquake survival kits and chairs and tables and so on. So the same philosophy should prevail. That is the idea of...
So I'd like to make another comment here, looking to the drawings of your village. I was thinking that that village is for me an example of natural reality. People live in homes, get out of the home, see other people on the street, see other buildings, walk. The senses are touching the surroundings. Now let's imagine living in Beverly Hills. Nobody goes out on the street. You have to go into your car. The only touch of the surrounding is via telephone or television. And therefore I think that we are facing a situation in which we have to balance the natural reality with the artificial reality. It is still a reality. But look to our streets. We have signs saying walk, don't walk, and there's nobody walking. Everybody's in the car. We do not touch the reality anymore the way it used to be 100 years ago. Now, does it mean that we don't have to think of a new approach?
No, I don't think I agree with you, Nathan, 100% on that. I think that the reality is coming in a very forceful magnitude. The complexity of the problems we have in transportation is going to lead to make... let me just take it one step back. We don't have to go to very far to look at other examples. Look at New York City. Most New Yorkers learned how to live in a crowded subway and learned how to get on that subway and go to work, and people done it for decades. In a certain discipline, they learned how to survive with that and how to survive with each other. The solution which is going to be provided for Los Angeles is going to be much, much better than the ugliness of underground subways. I think that if any of you have been following up with the analysis of the last elections, there is a very good indication that there are people who are beginning to think twice about what is good for the community and what's good for the city. The idea of us as thinkers should be alleviated. we are not the only thinkers. We are going to end up like this group of bureaucrats in the middle of the desert. We will be isolated from the masses. We will be proposing ideas. We will be promoting very big projects in the middle of the desert for nobody to live in them. But when the solution is coming from the people out, it is the healthiest thing. I began to see a major movement among citizens. There are citizen groups formed now for the monorail system. Well, how many years we have been as idealistic academicians saying that the subway approach in Los Angeles is obsolete, is motivated by the unions to generate earth digging and concrete pouring jobs. How many times we blew our stack in meetings related to the environmental impact statement of the mass transit system, which the RTD have conducted 10 years ago. I can tell you, I went to so many of those meetings, and I could see the influence of certain political groups trying to copy New York City subway. It didn't happen. All they could succeed to do is 1.7 mile from downtown to the Fairfax area, or 2.7 miles from, I forgot the mileage exactly, but the idea is that the common sense and the healthy state of the community is reflecting on the political decision. And when we come here as planners and as architects and say that we are going to adopt a certain policy or a certain style, we really have to respond to the needs of the people. But the formula and the language we are going to work in drawing these solutions in should present the music, harmony, good design, details. We should not end up with badly designed buildings. Like there was an article, I don't remember if we put it in that pile or not, like public buildings, why they are not the best designs. Because they really cost money, and they really take the best of the human resources in the system via tax allocations and so on. And the answer is simple, because people do not participate in critique. So if we begin to look at elderly housing, for example, take the elderly situation in the United States. Very difficult on young architects to think of elderly housing because they are not old yet. And when you start getting in a position of taking care of your parents, you are young and your parents are young, so you don't have the issue in your life at all. You begin to think of the scenario, and then the country now is going to be 65% above 60 years old, and we are designing elderly towers. I'm ashamed to say that I am doing one right now for Santa Ana, 256 units and 8 stories, concrete building. It is terrible. I think it's terrible. I admire very much countries like Sweden and like Yugoslavia and like Scandinavian countries who restrict elderly housing to anything more than 2 stories. I think Professor Shapira is aware of that. We were discussing that a couple of weeks ago. It is not the planners, it is not the architects alone, it is the people. So the people have perceived that elderly should not be in high-rise towers. The formula which produced elderly towers here in this country have been economics, and have been land use, and have been mass production. We can take care of 256 elderly because we can get 2 vans 24 hours at the door, while if we go 2-story, we will have to spread that on a very big land, and we have to get 10 vans to reach and to pick up the people from faraway points. Go over the analysis any way you like, but we are not a separate elite. We are a conscious group of people. We are knowledgeable. We are able to perform art merged with science, so we can be labeled as designers. But for whom? Not to carry an ego trip, not to, we have to perform for the society we are living with. And the awareness, the degree of awareness which I see happening in the mass transit issue in Los Angeles is very promising. Because if that trend continues, we are not going to end up with stupid projects. And we will get those precast columns plugged into, not plugged, I mean, inserted into the middle of the freeways with very minimal efforts, and the monorails will be rolling in 6 months from now if they want to. But how to break the cycles of bureaucracy? That's the question.
Well, do I understand well then that what you recommend is more advocacy planning, more users' participation, like in phase 2 in Egypt?
This is a very good point, Nathan, and I think as much as the United States and the Western world economies have been a good example for the underdeveloped and the third world, the third world through, let me go to my generation of graduates, like my class was 40, and we were taught by Hassan Fathi directly. The man was still in his 60s when I was a student, so he was very well motivated and very able to give lectures on weekly basis. And then we graduated and we followed the movement. We were, through his spirit and through another 5 or 6 younger, like in the 40s at that time, that was their age, through that faculty, a movement happened in this part of the world, and a human solution is being provided. We are saying that we cannot sit down and look for the typical way you price tag your education in the American university in a way that I am paying that much on my education and I should make this money when I graduate. And we all have student loans and we understand this. But beyond that, there is a mission. There is a mission we have to survive. I worked on the board for 5-6 years. I was worried about paying my car premium, everything. I mean, this is the natural process of growth. But I should not forget the other mission while I am doing this. That is what I'm saying, that while Los Angeles went through this cycle of inflation and massive growth, how many good architects got sidetracked and lost their sanity and became disassociated with the values they were, and the best, believe me, the best students in their times, the ones who really made it big, got completely alienated. There are very, very rare cases like Charles Moore and like Frank Gehry, the people who can remain emissive and inspiring. And we as students of architecture and urban planning, we should never make ourselves a commodity where we price tag our services, because really our inputs in society are priceless. As a leadership, you must maintain that balance, because it will come back to you again.
I'd like to ask a hypothetical question here. You mentioned about the last elections, and it is true that the last elections we had more issues to vote than ever. Took a long time for those who wanted to really make a point of view, to read the ballot and to understand what was in each case. What was interesting is that more and more questions about buildings, how much money should go to schools, how much money should go to prisons, how much money should be allocated here and there. Do you foresee that it is realistic at all to hope that we may have some ballots in the future in which architects propose different solutions and people will have to vote on what sort of town hall they want, on what sort of, we will get like a magazine instead of a ballot, and we vote on alternative solutions developed by various architects? Is this possible with our electronic communication at all?
Well, with the electronic communications, you will not have to go to a voting booth, God willing. That will not. You will be able to vote while you are in your car by punching your code number and voting or whatever. But the mechanism is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the essence of our mission, and that is what cares about how to spend tax money. This tax money is very valuable, because if you just see what Egypt is doing to begin to trick businessmen in paying taxes, a system which is existing on the papers for so many years but not enforced. how to trick people in beginning to pay taxes. Now you have a system here which is working fantastic, how to spend the money. So as planners, as architects, the sense of mission should not be underestimated though. That is the depth of the whole thing. That is why you have a stack of paper like this. I don't think that anybody should feel obligated to go into the whole scope of our profession from A to Z, abstracts to work on drawings and specifications of screws, but we should feel that that is the mission, and we can carry from it as much as we can. Each one should contribute as much as he or she can. The development and the evolving of the democratic voting in any country around civil issues, not political issues, is the healthy thing. When you are voting on issues, it doesn't matter who's the guy on the top really, because he is that party is representing certain methodology and certain value, and if the majority of the people vote for that party, it's not necessarily voting for that man. So that man, let us not make the same mistake the media is doing and focus on personalities and the individuals. Again, we should take that out of the process. We should, as architects, as developers, as designers, we should be going directly to the issues of quality in life. Quality in life, and we should always look at that curve of relationship between population and quality of life. I urge you to go and pursue the papers which were developed during the 60s in Athens under the Doxiadis school. The methodologies are enormous, they are excellent, they are as equal as listening to the 30s jazz, and they will make you shiver because they will save your time and energy. They have analyzed the human aspirations in its widest spectrum and verbalized the action plans which architects and planners and designers and politicians should take without being anything but human. And that, if you spend a week of your life pursuing that and getting your hand on this material from the library and just get to know about it, I hinted about that in the back of my publication here. At the end you will find some tables and formulas and the equations which came out of the school of Doxiadis, but that is not everything about it. You should read the social papers, you should read the papers written by bankers, and you should read the papers written by doctors and nurses. All of them went to the school of Doxiadis. We all met in the summer in Athens, and it was, unfortunately the man died. If he, pardon?
How do you spell that?
Doxiadis. D-O-X. It is on my cover letter. I mentioned his name in my cover letter.
I think you said that you brought also not only a bunch of papers but a bunch of slides. Do we look to the bunch of slides?
Well, I don't want to bore them to death. That is,
But they like them.
well,
It's a visual enchantment.
I'm sorry to say that the video you saw, although it was a genuine, wonderful effort, I don't think I deserve it to be documented at all. The color quality did not show the slides really the way it should. So
You want to show?
you don't have any idea how some of those slides would have said million words if they have been properly. Down the line, at the end of the class, before graduation or something, we will bring those slides.
Tonight's video is in color, so we record your slides in color.
Oh, thank you.
Well, didn't you bring some?
No, no. I didn't bring them today.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay. Well, then
We-
perhaps we could
yeah.
go into questions and...
I'll bring one slide, the one with the ice on the cart with 3 men transporting it. That is just an example of value of time. You name it.
Okay, then perhaps let's go to some questions and I'll carry the mic. When you ask a question, not to Yusuf, look to him when he's answering.
I'm the first one, huh? Well, it's good to see you again.
I know your experience is very profound in Africa, and you are fresh, so take it easy on that.
No. No, what, essentially what I was going to ask you is that you presented um, a dilemma. This is awkward looking. Presenting a dilemma of the fact that you have a project now that you're doing that deals with an elderly housing that is a high rise, yet you believe strongly that elderly shouldn't be placed in a high rise. This, I think, is a dilemma that many designers, architects that we're confronted with. We're confronted with projects we receive or are commissioned to do that we are brought in at the end of the project, where that only we are asked to develop something that has already been premeditated or developed already in a concept, so that we're really asked to sort of furnish the trimmings for a particular project, and it really leaves us little innovation, little impact on the actual user because we're dealing with such a tight program. How do you deal with this dilemma? How do you confront this dilemma? Is there a way in which you can somehow interface or intermediate between what has already been done and what you aspire to actually do? How does one confront this dilemma? And if you could example the particular case that you brought up.
Ricardo, I have to say that the answer in my mind and the answer as I learned it to be is via the quality of design. We can produce a finished product, although it is a high-rise and although it is a concrete building. It is not a stack of glass and concrete which is deprived from any human feeling or human scale. I learned my lesson very well when I worked with Tasso Kotsalas in Pittsburgh, and we did back in the early 70s the very striking and award-winning project for elderly, for low-income housing across the river from downtown Pittsburgh. And there is an irony to that project. It was part of a master plan. That master plan was part of urban revitalization program, and it consisted of building a major center across the river from downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In the center, it would be a large shopping center. On the left side, closer to the intersection of the two rivers, of the three rivers, the Three River Stadium there is a concentration of high-income luxury townhouses, similar to the housing you see around Century City here, very much the same. And the other side of the shopping center was allocated for low-income housing. And it was a very balanced project, volumetrically at least, because the politicians thought that, hey, we are not spending the taxpayers' money here unfairly on the rich or unfairly on the poor. We are doing a low income here, and we are doing an upper middle class income here, and there is a shopping center in the middle. They can meet in the middle. Let me give you the results of that project. It was a competition, and it was won by 3 offices. One office won the high income housing, and they thought that they are the winners. We got the good piece of the project. We got the nice housing. The other guys got the low income. And another firm got the shopping center. The firm who got the high income housing did a good conservative job, and we took our hat to them, and very nice conservative architecture with nice gables and lawns and everything. Our scheme for the low income literally consisted of complete separation of the car from the pedestrian. The core of the project consisted of 2 major curves where we put all the townhouses for the low income on a curve. That was very revolutionary for HUD to perceive. We presented our designs in a study model. It was 8th scale study model made of wood, and it was not showing the brick. The curve was controversial enough to make HUD director blow his stack and say, you guys are making fancier plan than the one going for the upper income. We told them, don't penalize us because the other guy is making a poor plan. We believe that the curve will develop an immense amount of energy and curiosity into this little neighborhood that it will be lacking if we provide straight line. It was a big fight. It was not approved. We did all kinds. And that is when we come and talk about politics. When we talk about politics in architecture and in planning, you get the brainwash which you get from the public and the street people that politics means corruption. No, it is not corruption. Politics is how to deal with such an issue, how to deal with an establishment. And Ricardo, I'm not getting far from answering your question. I'm trying to get around to tell you what I'm going to do in Santa Ana, okay? So what happened in Pittsburgh about 15 years ago, that we began to communicate with the city organism. And in that time, Tasso Kotsales is a pro in that because being a very devoted member of the Bauhaus school, and he was a very disciplinarian man, and he is a Greek in the same time with a lot of human values just popping out of him. We could not accept defeat. The whole system was presented with the scheme, and we spent one night after the other presenting that scheme to powerful people in the city until we got HUD director to accept it. And under pressure, the building was built, not the building, it was something like 15 acres development. And it won about 3 awards in 2 consecutive years. It is the best low-income housing designed in Western Pennsylvania or in Pennsylvania. A lot of people couldn't believe when somebody give an address to a party, people invited to a party or something, they go to that side of the master plan thinking that is the high income. And they never believe that the other one is the high income side. The design values and the proportions and the point of view, the point of architecture is a point of view. If you don't have a point of view to present, don't be an architect because you will be a pushover. Don't be an architect or don't be a planner unless you are able to plan for others. So you got to have a point of view. You got to have strength. And the idea of convincing the system and dealing with the politics, it is really dealing with human weakness. And that is what politics is all about. Politics is dealing with human weaknesses to produce results. Because you take yourself as an individual and you are consisting of components which some of them want you to stay in bed in the morning. You don't want to get up. But you got to get yourself up. You got to go to work. You got to go to school. So if you call that politics of getting yourself out of bed, it is just the same in society at large. It takes a very special chemistry. It takes a very special elite of people. They are interconnected from the academia into the government offices. In every government office, there is a wonderful dynamic person who is always a minority. Go find them as a planner and see how much support you're going to get. This is politics. You have to find the positive elements of society which allow positive ideas and evaluations to happen. What is happening in Santa Ana, Ricardo? In 1985, there was a competition for, they call it the Civic Center expansion. They call it worse than that. They call it Parcel A11. And it is, in any correspondence we have with the city, if we call it the Santa Ana Center, they don't like that. We have to put Parcel A11 development. So those people communicate with the project through that terminology and take that and multiply it in a scale with many other things. How to get the city of Santa Ana to do expansion to a civic center which is not to date cohesive. Santa Ana as a city have special population profiles and trends. There is a major Mexican-American population there. It is an industrial city by all means. It is not the most attractive market for developers, because developers would rather spend $10–15 million in Newport Beach, just a couple of miles away, and make 2 or 3 times more income on them with no risk of bankruptcy. So Santa Ana had a hard time due to its circumstances to really develop and lure in developers to expand the civic center. In 1985, there was a competition for that so-called A11 parcel. All firms in the country interested in that kind of a project submitted their proposals. Skidmore, Owing and Merrills did. Dim Jim, Daniel, I don't know if you know the firms here or not, but these are the big firms which, when they submit in a big project like that, small guys just say, it's not our level, and we drop out. What happened by hooks or crooks, I submitted a proposal. My proposal was far-fetched from what city liked to see. I was very much influenced by my impressions about Santa Ana. It was just a pure impression. It was nothing more than, gee, if I want to eat cheap Mexican food, I should come here. This is a Mexican-American major, about 80% Mexican-American population. And those people are in the streets all the time. They are trying to walk. There is no sidewalks. I mean, these are impressions I'm developing in my head without any idea that there is a competition coming up in Santa Ana at all. 1985, everybody was just beginning to get busy after the recession of 82 and 83, and who have time to go into competitions, especially when the big boys are playing. And the other proposals came from, on our firm level, there was another architect in Santa Monica. Anyway, there is no need to mention names, but there was no proposal submitted to the city of Santa Ana proposing anything but glass office buildings, except my proposal. My proposal was a mixed occupancy village to mitigate the hard effects of the already pride of the city civic center, which look ugly, group of office buildings not related together with any pedestrian system, employees working for the city walking across the civic center carrying folders in their hands. I think it is ridiculous. And that's what they call it, the civic center. So when that idea, and we received in the mail the invitation for the competition came, I submitted to the city an idea to do a mixed occupancy complex as a village. I was dropped out. I was screened off from the first cycle. I was taken out completely. They let about 3 or 4 front runners to continue, and all the schemes evolved around office towers and more fashionable. The Blendo Manifesto, it continued. More attractive things with angles in them and the glass towers and so on. That's fine. No developer could adopt the recommendations because those glass buildings have to be by appraisers and by very meticulous process of appraising, proven that they are going to be occupied. They cannot prove that those buildings are going to be occupied, and therefore no developer was interested in building an office building in Santa Ana or another office building in Santa Ana until 1987, where they had to go back and dig in the old files. And I received a call out of the blue 2.5 years later. And the planner, Roger Cooey, the director of the city, said to me, Yusuf, out of all the odds which happened on this project, one good thing happened, that the planning commissioner happened to remember your proposal. And in a storm of anger, they were angry at each other in planning commission. He told me, in a storm of anger, they said, that guy who submitted the housing proposal and you laughed at him, get him back. And I was called back. And that was not a coincidence. It was a coincidence as it seems. But that is the translation of what I'm telling you, that we have to be persistent and we have to respond to our feeling about what's right and what's wrong. If we really, as children, keep that ability to distinguish between what's right and what's wrong, we will be able to, because the forces of economics forced the politicians to come back to what's right and what's wrong. And if you are ready as an architect and as a designer with the solution, they will call you. They will definitely call you. But you have to keep after it. As a matter of fact, I did not keep after it. I dropped out. I thought it was just I tried, that's big deal, and I forgot about it. However, the idea of presenting a point of view did not really start by submitting the proposal. It started by submitting the vocabulary of the implementation. And now I'm going to begin to answer your question. The 256 units, which are going to be in 8 stories, are going to be a break-even economics. And in development, break-even economics means one of two things. Either the developer ripped off the project completely out front, that the remaining balance of debt on the project at the time of completion became equal to the income of that project. So it is a not negative cash flow enough to justify a banker to take a decision to finance it. You understand what I'm saying? Or that the project is so well designed that it costed too much money to provide certain qualities that you had to do, that the designer succeeded to force the banker to accept less profit or less returns vis-a-vis the quality of the project. Am I clear about that? So when I'm going to begin to put the layout, which we're doing right now on Santa Ana, and you will laugh that the Santa Ana project was 16-story high tower. It was not 8-story. The politicians wanted a 16-story tower. That is what they wanted. So we came down to 8. That's progress. And that is still working with the network of economics of the United States. We have to provide housing for the elderly. And we have land use formulas, and we have economics, and it have to pencil out. So now my second phase is really the trick, how I'm going to throw that curve again, which we did in Pennsylvania, which will create a human scale village in an 8-story building complex. We'll see. I'm as curious about it as anybody else, but we are going to do it. All I'm going to promise myself about this project, Ricardo, that I'm not going to produce a piece of architecture which I will deny that I have anything to do with it. So the human scale is going to be implemented. The budget will not be ripped off by a developer, because we are not letting the developers whom we think they are thieves come to the project. You know how? Because the developers, the first thing the developer asks about when they have a project presented to them, who is the architect? And if a certain type of architect is involved, certain type of developers walk away. And I'm proud to say that. It's going to be a good project. We are not going to let anybody to come in and make cheap quality, and we are going to produce a Greek village down there again. So it's going to happen. That is the answer to Ricardo's question. I'm not ashamed of it, as I said I am, but the type of project is normally the type of project we should be ashamed of doing, of putting elderly in 8-story high buildings. But we will try to beat that.
But don't you think, after 8 years of Reaganomics, for instance, that is a never harder than now reality to face up to, in that banks have such a control over the construction and development industries, and aesthetics have become, in a Reaganomic way of thinking, the necessary evil that your last nickel is to be put into. I'm speaking purely economic, in economic sense, and also I see the innocence is the wrong word, but the mission, as you said, of the 60s, that is something that architects and designers were using as a primary goal back then, as somewhat absolved, or at least disappeared from the mainstream of creative thinking. Do you agree, or?
From the creative thinking, but again, the faculty which produced the 60s is the direct effects of enormous amount of prosperity which flooded the world after World War II. The principles of the design movement, who were very severely disciplined in the Bauhaus and the Beaux-Arts schools as two major elements of the urban planning movement, if you like to accept that kind of polarization of thought. You have Frank Lloyd Wright here, you have the Bauhaus, you have Le Corbusier, you have the other polars of architecture around the world, but we are just trying to make it simple in our method of perceiving criteria to polarize the whole design movement into, you have Mies van der Rohe, of course, and you have the whole movement which produced people like Philippe Johnson and people like, I mean, we can go over enormous amount of output of principals who have contributed to the design of urban centers in this country. Those people, I call them the faculty, because they were really much more than Charles Moore, for example. They are much more than somebody like me who is just a practitioner. They came out in an era where the need for growth was beyond the need for aesthetics. The solution for functional need of space in the United States produced the glass office building, not Mies van der Rohe. Mies van der Rohe was the architect who brilliantly detailed the curtain wall, and it just the mass production techniques kept producing over and over again in a boring way. The same way with cars. Again, don't look at architecture and planning in a separate context from all the other products of life. Is the automobile industry subject to the same forces which it was subject to in the 60s? The answer is no. The glorious type of what you call it, if you look at a 57 Chevy and you say, gee, what a genius design, what a beautiful design, and then you look at an 88 Chevy also and you say, what a stupid car. Don't do that, because each car came in a different era to provide a different solution. I don't have any hard feelings about what is going in the last 20 years in our urban scene. I really don't have any cynical criticism. I think that architects, developers, bankers all worked to a point where they provided to the economy the space needed, whether it was housing, offices, factories, etc. I look at partisan policies. That is something I will agree with you on. When you call it Reaganomics or whatever, I look at partisan policies as points of view. That is where we come as architects and planners, with points of view, developed points of view within our intellectual system, and equipped with the tools of dealing with such kind of Reaganomics and such kind of Carternomics and all these kind of things. I really don't think at economic cycles in a personal way. Most architects and developers are furious as anybody is angry at the worst thing in the world about the controlled growth movement in Los Angeles and Southern California. I am not. It is depriving me. I have at least 5 or 6 projects which we're going to provide bread and butter to at least 5, 6 people working in my office. Those projects are froze because of the controlled growth. I am really saying that, and I believe it. I'm going to be hurting economically because I don't have these projects working. The developers are, two of them are going to go bankrupt because they cannot do anything else with this land, because controlled growth policy is, they know they are going to be frozen for 5 years. That's it. So some people are hurt more than me. Some people more hurt than an architect or than a citizen in a functional role in society, doing his job in the morning at 8, going home at 5, making 20 or 30,000 a year. This is much different than that. Again, the media try to make it look like it is jobs and salaries. At the bottom line, it is the quality of life. If we have a checklist of what will make the quality of life much better, and that's why I'm sorry again I made this pile of paper, because it's giving you scenarios. One of those sheets here, and I don't want to go into this package at all, it is totally your baby. You take it, put it in the garbage, or go read it or whatever. But one of those sheets here are giving you a scenario, a church group being a question was cast, how can we improve the quality of life? And they gave that question to a planning group like ours, and they gave that question to a church group. And each group produced a bubble diagram, a chart, hierarchical chart of activities, network of activities. And you got to see the scenario on both sides. The question is the same, and the answer, the methodology perceived is quite different between the planners and the church group. So we got to take, if we are going to be good professionals, we got to be above politics. Otherwise, we will never be able to affect politics. We can criticize Reaganomics, and we can criticize the democratic approaches of spending, and we can, that is like chewing gum, you know. Be above that. If you are going to be an urban planner, be above that, for God's sake. Because it is really, again, the degree of awareness of the citizen will influence the decision making in this society. And if every one of us live in a community, like, I don't know what brought up the Santa Ana project. There are some other projects which I can talk about even more comfortably. This project is still in the approval process in the city. I don't feel very comfortable talking about it. But if everyone do in his own little corner, in his own little angle, what he think it is right, maybe that Santa Ana example will happen everywhere. Or that low-income housing project in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania will happen everywhere. If we are going to take a step back and begin to look at the polarized mass of population in a way that it is not belonging, that as if we don't belong to one side or the other, well, we are going to lose 50% of our chances by simple thinking. The theory of probability will say that if you are so extremely Republican or so extremely Democrat, you are going to be losing 50% of your sources of work if the work is so politically oriented. And I don't think that any of us can afford that. If you really want to be a good professional, you should be above politics. You should be able to control this politics. That is not by anything except just proposing the right thing in the right time. Do that little, and the rest will come. That's what I'm trying. That is why the movement Hassan Fathi started in Egypt worked out, because he graduated generations of believers. So those people now are trying to do aesthetics, trying to do details, trying to do city planning, trying to balance the economy. It's taking time. But my God, who can believe that Egypt is doing decentralization scheme for the whole country using computers? I would have never believed it if I was there 20 years ago. So I wouldn't call it Reaganomics or anything like that then. I respect your opinion, It shows a citizen concern. But as an urban planner, you should be much more in grasp of the two extremes at the same time.
Wording was inappropriate in that I should have probably said Reaganomics or whatever. My point was that the results of the economic, cultural, and basically value orientation of Americans in the last 10 years particularly was my concern in that statement, and that I have seen the mission, as you have said, having grown up and been educated in the 60s and early 70s, as not as much of a concern with today's young people and today's professionals and the reasons that people enter professions today versus my generation when we entered professions. And what was important to us, our mission, our personal mission, for example, seems to have been very different. I guess that was my main concern.
The quality of life will remain indifferent. The quality of life will remain be the goal, the platform, and the standard. And we set the standards, just like the same guy who designed the 57 Chevy and who was forced to design the 88 Chevy. I mean, I can't give you enough examples to show that the movement in its a lot of people are predicting that the United States in general will become a third world country by the year 2000. And I don't know why that analogy is not true. For some, I tend to, it makes sense, okay, from the deterioration of quality of life we see around us. It begin to make sense. But I say something different again on the optimistic side. I say that the quality of life in the third world...
Perhaps we should adjust the title of our discussion today. Originally we thought that you will talk about the responsibility of the architect and the designer in low-income economies. I think I would just cut the last part and leave it to the responsibility of the architect and the designer, because I think that listening to you, ultimately, if the answers are different, certainly the questions are always the same, and they are all around what makes the quality of life. I want to thank you for your inspiring words and for spending time and for your generosity in preparing all these papers. Perhaps papers will stay with us. The Romans used to say, scripta manent, verba volant, scripta manent, which means words are flying, writings are staying. Perhaps we can adjust it and say slides are flying, words are staying. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really don't deserve all of that. We are all in the same position. We are all trying to discover the unknown and come up with the best formula for life. So let us work together and let us believe in really doing something. Otherwise, let us go do something else. That is the bottom line.
Okay, now those of you who have projects to show, please stay. Those of you who don't have projects,